Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and greetings from Madrid. We are extremely honoured and happy to have with us today the President of Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid, who is in Madrid to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between our two countries, between Spain and Estonia. And she also happens to be here, of course, on the 8th of March, which is International Women's Day. So congratulations to that as well. It's a wonderful, important day for all of us today. And of course, as you all know, she is one of only approximately 20 female heads of state. Estonia is also unique because we also have a female prime minister. So I think this is one of so many examples of what a remarkable country Estonia has become in recent decades. So we're very honoured and happy to have you with us. And I'm joined by three very dear friends and colleagues. We have Mira Milosevich, who is a senior analyst here at the Elcano Royal Institute. And she, as I mentioned to you earlier, is a Russia specialist. She deals with our sometimes rather complicated Eastern EU neighborhood and with issues like disinformation and so on. We also have with us Ignacio Torreblanca, who is a political science professor at the Open University here in Madrid, and is also the director of the European Council on Foreign Relations Office in Spain. And last but by no means least, we have Simón. Simón is a senior analyst at Elcano, and he has been running our office in Brussels. So he helps us to understand what's going on in NATO and within the EU as well. So, Madam President, if I may start with a general question about the pandemic, and it's a sort of semi-philosophical question, if you like. Estonia has branded itself as a high-tech nation. In fact, you are pioneers in the field of biotech specifically, and you also describe yourselves as a digital republic. Approximately 20 years ago, at the turn of the century, you digitalized the state, public services, and so on. And I was wondering, from an Estonian perspective, what is your view, what have we learned as a result of the pandemic about the strengths and weaknesses of societies such as yours and ours? It's often said that, if you want to see how a country has done in response to the pandemic, you basically have to look at three things. One is technology, and of course the digital element here is crucial. The second is good governance. And the third is perhaps less tangible, but I suspect you have also done very well there, and that is social cohesion. Can you tell us a little about your thoughts, not only as a politician, but also as someone who has a background in the sciences, in the field of biology, and someone who has been extremely interested in high-tech developments?
Yes, and maybe the astonishes you therefore, but what I would say is that the biggest change, if we compare a year ago and today, is that we Europeans have kind of reinstated our faith in social market economies. Because even if we may differ, for example, Estonian labour market is very free and our economic thinking is very liberal, myself included. I'm a liberal economic thinker, definitely. Yet we have learned that the social security network is something which our people expect of our governments. It has been very clear that they expect the governments to be the source of the last insurance. The last layer of security provider is in Europe, the government. There are democratic allied countries to us where this is not the work of the government, neither by the government's own understanding nor by the people's understanding. But here in Europe, we have clearly seen that in these situations like pandemic, this delivers for us. And it doesn't not only deliver for the weakest parts of the society, but for everybody else as well. Because people who have barely, belonging to middle class, earning, really good living, they have lost jobs in these pandemics. And some of them for a year and longer. And they have been in the kind of a high added value services sometimes, which are the sign of a developed nation, for example, personal trainers or sports club workers or HoReCa as well. These services are mostly meant for affluent people, and now those people who work there, they've lost their jobs. And I believe that if we could direct now our societies out of this crisis, that not only we will achieve the fight against climate change and the greening of European economy, and of course the digitalization, but also more respect to the responsibility of the government to provide egalitarian education, also healthcare systems which are easily accessible to everybody and to not create liquidity problems for those who are not well off, because some countries do not use direct payment between the doctor and the healthcare provider, but you have to pay yourself, for example. But we will be able to really share the benefits of economic growth, which would have been daily reaping from also from our European Union market. We'll be able to share them in a more fair way, without at the same time hampering the economic growth, which means that it is the state which takes responsibility for flexicurity, to use the Danish word, not the enterprise. Enterprises have to be free to reduce, to expand, and hire and fire, but the state carries the ultimate responsibility that people are not, feeling destitute. And this feeling is kind of stronger than it was before. And now, of course, the risk is we get it wrong again, because in my understanding, for the last 30 years, we've been getting this wrong. If you notice what has been going on in European economies, it is that constantly our markets have been underpaying labor. How do I know it? We have growing parts of our budget which deal with in-job benefits, social housing, support for families where both parents work, and not even in a low-skill sector. If you want to buy an apartment in a big city in developed Europe, on teachers or policemen or project manager's salary, it takes you more than a generation to pay back. These are all signs that labor is underpaid in Europe. Now, if we manage to kind of maneuver ourselves out from this crisis in a way that, companies recognize their responsibility to pay the full cost of labor, and we as governments can withdraw from our fiscal obligations to provide these social services, we will all win, because we don't have to raise taxes. Our citizens will regain self-esteem that they are not reliable on state budget, but they can handle their own lives with what they earn. And we have created a stronger social market economy here in Europe. But you see, this demands a lot of understanding on all sides. And I hope this pandemic has created this understanding for all of us. And then now we can talk about climate change, technology, and all this.
I'm going to ask Ignacio Torreblanca to jump in very quickly, but one of the many interesting things about your CV is the time you spent in the EU Court of Auditors. So you must know the European beast quite well from inside. And I was wondering, as a liberal, in particular, since you defined yourself thus, do you feel that the EU's response has been adequate? Are you happy? Are you satisfied with what I think by most accounts has been quite a remarkable attempt to deal with a totally unprecedented challenge? People, of course, were quite critical initially because the EU was a bit hesitant in the first few weeks and perhaps months. But by and large, although the vaccine rollout is also being a little bit disappointing in countries such as Spain and elsewhere, by and large, I think many European citizens feel the EU has stepped up to the plate. What's your analysis of this, and given your long-standing knowledge of the EU as an organization as well?
Yeah, I would never call EU a beast. I would call EU a complicated legal construct, which is by definition difficult to understand to its citizens, but which helps our politicians to work together in Europe in a prearranged form, which is exactly what European Union is delivering to us every day. It's not like climate negotiations globally, where you take 5 years to agree where to go, then 4 years on to what you will discuss and decision-making method, and then nobody implements it anyway. We have a place where we go and according to treaty negotiate and decide for all of us collectively in solidarity. And this is what is European Union. Collective decision-making place in solidarity. And all the decisions European Union therefore takes are as good as its national leaders who go to the council, to the big building and take these decisions. And indeed, in this pandemic, they have not been 100% the best decisions, but in the lack of information, in the time frame, these decisions have to be taken, and also considering that each decision is a compromise between member states, varied political positions, etc., I think European Union has managed extremely well. Trouble, of course, is that, this initial hesitance stems from the fact that Europe doesn't have a social pillar. And frankly speaking, I wouldn't advocate, let's now build a huge social pillar. I very much like this way how Europe or the nation state functions. We accommodate our common needs in solidarity, by which we create the space for governments to act in the benefit of their own people, also keeping certain level of genetic competition between the different economic and social models. And this facilitation has been there also in this crisis. We clearly see it. In addition, European Union has taken upon itself, for example, this agreement on vaccine development and distribution in Europe, for which it is not best equipped. As an auditor, I would say European Union took upon itself a job which it was not prepared to do. Considering also this aspect, I would say they have managed to keep it well. So indeed, I share a feeling that our Europe has delivered. Our Europe has also tried to keep Schengen functional. Well, it has not succeeded every day, but this is because, initially when you are in the epidemic phase and not in a pandemic situation, it makes sense to restrict moving across the borders. And now our people are a bit used to, that if there is a difficult situation, let's close the borders. Whereas, of course, the Commission tries to remind us that, we keep the borders open, we just apply measures in each country which this country sees fit in the current situation, which is an approach I strongly support and encourage in our thinking. So indeed, I agree, our union has also been delivering for us in this crisis.
Great. Ignacio, if you would like to jump in. And let me make clear that I was using beast in the friendliest possible way. Ignacio.
Thank you too much. Thank you so much, President. Welcome to Spain. Welcome to Madrid. It's a pleasure to have you here. You're also a distinguished member of the European Council on Foreign Relations, so so happy to join. I think my first time in Tallinn was quite a while ago with Charles Powell, and so we're working together for quite a while on issues like this and bilateral relations. And let me show you my respect and admiration for your country as a front runner on many issues. Not only of course on cyber, but on holding democratic values and principles and in foreign policy as well. So thanks for that. I'm quite interested maybe in the external impact of the pandemic, to which extent the pandemic is helping transform how we see the world or how we see ourselves acting in the world. It is curious that we fail sometimes to learn from the fact that external events are acting as a configurator of EU integration in a way which was never in the playbook, is often seldom in the playbook, but yet we see a lasting impact. And this has been in the past, in the recent past, with the financial crisis, but also with the refugee crisis, with the invasion of Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. We spend a lot of time looking at ourselves, but we're shaping the world as much as the world is shaping us. And I think in this case, it's been said that the pandemic, of course, has been an accelerator of existing trends. That's true. We had a world in which fragmentation of globalization and the rise of great power rivalries and geopolitics was already there. But now we see that because of the pandemic, we've seen increasing levels of geopolitical competition, not only as digital and green, but also technology has become so relevant. We're looking at how vaccines themselves are. We were looking at in Spain, of course, at the vaccination map of the Latin American continent, and it's amazing because that's Europe is totally absent from there. Is basically we never thought that Latin America would be the backyard of both China and Russia in terms of vaccination. It is already the backyard of Russia and China in terms of technology, for example, when it comes to infrastructures, but also disinformation, for example, a phenomenon you know so well. You may want to know that Russia today in Spanish is larger than the operation in English, thanks to Latin America and so on. So there are lots of things out there reminding us of the fact that we need to do more, that we need to do better. A recent poll we carry out at 11 member states at ECFR showed us that for Europeans, it's going to take a while to rebuild our trust in the US. We are of course very welcome to Biden and his administration and his ideas, his rescue of alliances, but it's not to be taken entirely for sure that that is going to be lasting long, or maybe that the horizon that we have now is just for 4 years and it's not clear when we will be facing bumps along the transatlantic road. So maybe this is a topic, that I would want to raise with you as well, to the extent to which I think we should see strategic autonomy, transatlantic relations, and multilateralism as compatible things. The more we have of all of these things, the better for all. And sometimes it seems that there is kind of a tension or a trade-off in that, precisely because we should not damage transatlantic relations by doing or by engaging in achieving our own strategic autonomy. But maybe what we've learned and what we're learning now is that the more we deliver abroad and the more we deliver at home in terms of foreign policy capacity, the better for all. And there is, of course, an agenda in your region when we're facing regional powers like Russia, where they're still challenging. The visit of the HRVP to Moscow showed at which so low level and drifting relationships are. So maybe I would want also to ask you about this and to have your view on to which extent you see these crises as an accelerator of the demand and supply for EU foreign policy. So thank you for that, Charles, and thank you, President, for the time for being here.
I have to grab my pen because there are at least 3 areas which you touched upon. Let's start with the positive end. Climate change and digital transformation. On climate change, we should not be shy to admit that Europe and European Union, which is the richest and biggest common market globally, has the leading role and has accepted its leading role in saving our planet. We are creating the green bubble to make new technologies to thrive in the European market. We of course know that it also creates for us economic advantages later to come, but initially there is also cost and risk. And as I explained, we need to make sure that we are not, putting all these costs and risks on the weakest in the society. Yet we have created this market distortion, which says by 2050 no emissions. Price of CO2 emission is infinite, therefore nobody's emitting. We have not yet managed to kind of make this bubble kind of really functional because, for example, you can import from third countries electricity which has been produced without paying CO2 levies. And I think we need to remedy it to make our bubble airtight. But we are well on the way of saving this planet because we are big enough and rich enough market to influence technology development if we so wish. And from our developments, then the rest of the world can take notice when these technologies become economically feasible. Then it becomes not only environmentally useful, but also economically feasible for less developed nations to follow the suit. This way, I think we can shamelessly be proud of our Europe. Second area where very few people think that Europe has created itself a digital advantage. Over, by the way, also US, where. We have decided during the German Council presidency that each and every European has a right to digital ID, which in addition has to be eIDAS compatible. By this, we have created a potential for fully free digital services market in Europe, including exchange of data to provide cross-border government or public service. No other region globally has managed to create such an engine for future technology development, which could benefit inclusively the whole society. We can, in principle, start not only dreaming, but acting out services like a doctor prescribes you a medicine in Estonia, but you go and buy this in pharmacy in Helsinki or in Lisbon. By the way, this is a service which is available for Europeans today. Now imagine if our logistics companies exiting Estonia could do all the paperwork all the way down to Spain, passing Poland, Germany, everywhere, online. So we will make the goods markets function much better if we can make the services work seamlessly all over Europe, you see there is huge economic potential, which we have created for ourselves. It's there already for us to grab and use. So I hope people will start to understand it, that this is an opportunity, and stop telling that Europe is backwards in tech development. Yes, we have many problems and challenges, and the biggest is how we treat data. I feel that the free world needs to agree on what is the objective of data protection, do it in a technology neutral way and cross-sectorally. Because for some reason, when in the old times, when it was everything on paper, we were happy to regulate the outcome. Like, my doctor has to keep my file safe. Now we want to regulate the pathway to the outcome, even if tech cycle is shorter than data cycle. We try to tell the doctor, my file has to be kept in a red cupboard in the room which has green door. We shouldn't. We should create the legal space which is permissive for use of artificial intelligence, at the same time protecting our data, which means we should define the rules by which a company can gather data, use data, and dispose of the data. And this has to be an obligation for the technology company to show us that it is applied. And again, we have developments in Europe. I just opened a conference where the European Union, various countries and developers reported back on the proposal, which would later be the EU proposal for member states, on how to handle data and face recognition technology for the national security reasons inside the countries, to avoid crime, terrorism, all this. And my question to them was, why are you limiting it to the area where people feel like it's the state which gets the benefits? At the same time, we have companies who also work in face recognition. Why don't open the same rule book for each and everybody, so that they all could benefit this legal space which has been created? I think we need to do it this way, and then we are there. That's possible. Now I get to the second element of your question, and that was how powerful is Europe in projecting its economic might in our surroundings and in its ability to spread our values or even function in our surrounding regions according to our values. And here I would like to cite from UN Security Conference High Representative Borrell, who said for Europe to be able to, project its capabilities, it needs the capabilities. I think he meant also like strong military capabilities, but we need also diplomatic capabilities. And we need the capabilities to really work with the surrounding regions. And for that, we need also understanding what might be these capabilities. One is definitely our ability to train, our ability to cooperate, the old-fashioned capabilities. But we also need communication capabilities, where I feel that precisely with this example of Sputnik vaccine and the Russian and Chinese advances in strategic communication, we badly failed. Most of our journalists have bought that somewhere there is the ocean of Sputnik vaccine, where we can just dip our syringes and vaccinate all 400 million Europeans. This is not true. In Russia, about 2% of the people is vaccinated. In Europe, on average, we are reaching 6-7%. They have managed to produce about a couple of millions of doses. They have sold 300 million. They already have delivery difficulties. Sure. But we are buying all into this strategic communication hooks, like we were buying into this Russian planes in Italy, manual in Italy providing relief in the crisis. Meanwhile, we were ourselves all helping each other and neighbors. But we don't sell it this way. I think we should understand this is going on, and we should accept this is going on, and not only visible media. I just learned a couple of weeks ago from a trustful source that it only takes you $300 to buy 300,000 interventions, likes, comments online. So you can build a bubble and put it into some kind of public opinion rift or shift, and break the society. We have to be more open about this. We have to get radically stronger in talking to our people, and also in opening this kind of public saying that this is hoax to fall into. Another trap. Trump forced Europeans to spend 2%. Not true. Wade's decision, 2014, let's spend more. We need really to be open that we have not been on top with communication here. And communication, I'm sorry, nowadays is the real life much more than it used to be, and we need to get used to it. And indeed, this brings me to the third point that we we tend to think this way that, I mean, countries to the east see Russia as a threat. Our risk perception is different. It might be, but it shouldn't. Because after all these hybrid issues which we are viewing, after Salisbury, which has nothing even to do with digital technology, we should understand that Russia is using interesting but cheap tricks to try to break our societies and to gain influence. Because after all, it has to be economical. It is a small economy. It's not a big economy. And this is something which you also have to recognize, that in Europe, during the Cold War times, Russia or Soviet Union was the global risk, meaning our regional risk coincided with the global one. So of course, transatlantic bond was very, easy to understand. They help us to contain Soviet Union. Now it's different. Russia is a regional risk. We need to be able to contain our regional issues by having ourselves the capabilities to reach forever. And globally, and together with our value-based partners like US, we try to keep the global world order rules-based the way it suits us. And for that, we also need to be open about the fact that we don't know where China is going. We understand where Russia is going. Its economy is shrinking. It tries to keep its conventional capabilities as high as possible close to our borders to still maintain the influence for a couple of decades. But where is China going? It's buying off the whole economies globally, creating, by the way, glass ceilings of development, because if government has made big deals for big business with somebody who is really big, then for local companies, what is left for SMEs to remain SMEs, they cannot grow. That's glass ceiling. We have to be open about these developments, and if necessary, then also ask these difficult questions. How can we go together to keep the rules-based world order?
Thank you. Mira, I suppose that some of the things you've been hearing are music to your ears.
Yeah, it is, and first of all, it is really great honor to be here today with one of the 20 leaders, female leaders in the world, and yes, that was a music for me, and I really agree with everything what the president said, and also I really like what Nacho Torreblanca said about that we are shaping the world as world is shaping us. So it is clear that pandemic is shaping the world and is shaping us, but also it's true that even this changing world, also it is true that the security environment, the pressure of revisionist powers, Russia and China, to broke the transatlantic relationship and develop an expansionist policy have largely remained the same. So I think that we have a lot of bad news as a consequences of the pandemic, but also we have there's some good news. The president highlighted some of them, and like climate change and digital transformation of the European Union. But I would like to highlight at least three good news from my point of view. The first one is the victory of Joe Biden in the last presidential elections in the US, and above all, his commitment to renew, rebuild, and reform the transatlantic partnership and multilateral cooperation. As Biden exclaimed in the Munich Security Conference, America is back. But also, I think that such return will only make sense if multilateralism is reinvented. And here it is clear that the European Union, as a normative power, must play a greater role in this task. So the good news is that America is back, that we will try to reinvent the transatlantic relationship, but also the European Union have to have main role. The second good news is, I think, the growing awareness about China and what it is capable to do. We have already known that the 21st century will be deeply marked by the confrontation between China and the United States. And also we know that it is an ideological and geopolitical conflict that is increasingly translated into a technological confrontation in a fight for technological supremacy. My impression is, I have to say, my impression more than knowledge in detail is that the US has been aware of this for a long time, but Europe is more and more aware that to avoid becoming a third of the confrontation between the two great powers, that Europe must build its strategic autonomy. So the awareness of the European Union is increasing, and also here I think that the natural ally in this context for Europe is, of course, the United States. Even we do not share always the same interest, but yes, we share the same democratic values. And I think that is our major instrument have to be in our fight with these authoritarian regimes which use technology to control their own population. The third good news is that NATO will work on a new strategic concept, and this new strategic concept should achieve what is indispensable for the Atlantic Alliance, a common vision of the threats to liberal democracies, and the division among member states over what kind of threat Russia or China represents must be overcome. I think that ambition of both of the European Union and NATO is to reinvent their policy towards Russia, which I hope will be liberated from the wishful thinking of the 19th, when we believed that Russia and China would be just another members of democratic institution started with their membership in the World Trade Organization. The idea that China and Russia would gradually democratize by accepting the economic system of capitalism has failed. The attempt to create a security and defense architecture after the end of the Cold War has also failed. So today, Russia represents the greatest threat to the European Union security, and Europe's future will be shaped by the pandemic, will be shaped by this reinvented transatlantic relationship after this advertised that America is back, but above all will be shaped by its response to the challenge posed by China and Russia. So in my look beyond the pandemic, I see that our task is the same as always. Regarding Russia and China and the actors as these days. Our task is to preserve the principles and values of the international order. And these principles, and I think that is very important to highlight, is that these principles and values guarantee the freedoms, sovereignty, and the independence of small countries as Estonia, small only in terms of physical size and population, in a world where the great power competition is increasing. So the consequences of the pandemic make this task more difficult, but we continue to count on the transatlantic relationship, which remains our best instruments for accomplishing it. So I would like also to ask the president, do you, as a leader of Estonia and one of the members of the Baltic states, in Europe, in Spain, we used to talk about the Baltic states more maybe than Lithuania, Lithuania, Estonia. But you are in the first line of defense of democracy. This is the eastern border of the European Union. This is the playground of West politics of Russia, but is the first line of defense. So Estonia was the first country which suffered the cyber attack of Russia, and Estonia is for it reason the first digital state in Europe. What will be your advice for countries which are not in the first line of defense, as Spain, regarding Russia? We are solidary. We have solidarity, of course, with the Baltic states, but maybe some advice more. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me remind our listeners that Estonia is about the size of the Netherlands, and we get always refer to the Netherlands as a small country. So size, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, Mira. Madam President.
I said physical, only physical size. I highlight.
The physical size of the country precisely is the size of Netherlands. The population is 1.3 million. But indeed, during our United Nations Security Council campaign, I mean, I learned myself really that, Estonia is neither small nor poor. I mean, it's a rich country and middle size. And we try to also contribute, for example, in digital development together with Smart Africa, according to our size and wealth levels. So we contribute where we can with methods we know best. But on what you could do to help us, I mean, be aware that we are not the only frontline state. You are too. And you know why? You are much bigger, as you rightly said, and you are a democracy. So by definition, you are, I mean, in the sights of those who don't like powerful democracies. And no, Estonia is not the frontline state when it comes to trying to hurt democracy. President Macron was at the front line when he stood outside of the Élysée Palace and told to President Putin, you were trying to influence our elections. US is the frontline state when it comes to influencing the elections. We know it happened last time. This time, they were not so defenseless because they were aware. So the best you can do to help us and also yourself is to recognize you are as frontline as we are, because modern attitudes are to economically, cheaply try to break our societies. I mean, I heard when I was visiting South America, you remember in Chile there were people's demonstrations. Non-democratic regimes were trying to influence what people were feeling in that country as well. So we have our real problems, and our people have their natural grievances about our societies. But they can nowadays be used like never before, and becoming aware of that. Meanwhile, of course, not forgetting that the conventional risks where we are the frontline state indeed are there, and we are very grateful, for example, for the Spanish participation in the Baltic Air Police mission, because in addition to being on frontline, and in addition of spending ourselves 2.35% of the GDP on defense already, we also are one of the smallest economies. I mean, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia happens to be one of the smallest economies of Europe. So our 2% doesn't take us to all modern capabilities. But since NATO sees itself as a defense union which needs to take care 360 degrees of itself, it is contributing with the forces and with the help of bigger nations. Which doesn't mean that we don't have obligations, by the way, to contribute in South. We are in Mali with French because in addition of being small, we are flexible, quick, and also there are, specialized skills in our army which are useful to each and every bigger army, and that has been so in Afghanistan and is so in Mali. So we contribute to the security, and we very much value the common contribution of all NATO partners and allies to our region's security, which we don't see as our region's security, but NATO's security as a whole. Because after all, defense alliance, promise to deter and protect is only to be trusted if it is successful 100% of time at all of its territory. So indeed, we rely on the capabilities which we will never be able to create ourselves. More and more, with the help of the enhanced forward presence, NATO understands what are these voids which we have been protecting NATO's northeastern flank, and it's learning constantly on how to be ready to handle the risks. And that's why I always say that, I mean, if I compare Estonia's position in a geopolitically seismic region to a country's position which is in a really seismic region, our advantage is that, I mean, however well you are prepared against earthquake, it will happen. There is no deterrent effect. But in NATO's action, I see a lot of deterrent effect. So indeed, you are doing a lot, and what you could do more is precisely this: recognize we are all, in modern days, we are all frontline states.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Simón to join us in this conversation, but before I do, could I raise this slightly sort of nerdy, think tanky debate about strategic autonomy? And please forgive me if you're already tired of this debate, which some people find rather abstract. But I think it's an interesting one, because most of our citizens, I think, again, as a result of the pandemic, have woken up to the fact that we are incredibly vulnerable in Europe in some specific areas, that we have deindustrialized, for example, that we find it quite difficult to actually produce some basic medicine. Even the whole vaccine question, of course, has raised some interesting issues. In other words, I think most European citizens acknowledge that strategic autonomy makes a lot of sense in terms of making sure that we have basic capabilities to respond to these kinds of challenges, the kinds of challenges that the pandemic has opened up. And that's, I think, probably not very controversial. What is, of course, more controversial is the other, more traditional interpretation of the idea of strategic autonomy. In other words, how far and in what ways should we advance towards a situation where we are capable of doing certain things on our own without having to ask others for permission, let's put it diplomatically, if you like. That's sort of by way of introduction, and perhaps I can ask Luis to jump in. And we haven't mentioned the EU's strategic compass. We've talked very briefly about NATO's new strategic concept, but perhaps, Luis, you could bring those things together for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Good morning, everyone. Madam President, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to exchange views with you on some of these important questions. I've actually been associated for quite a few years with the Baltic Defense College in Tartu, so I've had the opportunity to visit your country regularly. So a pleasure for me to be here. I'll get in on Charles's point on strategic autonomy, but before I really quickly wanted to pick up on your point about Russia being a regional power and China being a global power. I think this is a very important distinction, and we better come to grips with that distinction because I think it's going to have important implications for the transatlantic relationship going forward. Interestingly, the national security guidelines just published by the Biden White House a couple of days ago alluded to the fact that China is the only power that can systematically challenge the rules-based order. And I think that ties in with debates on how to deal with China in a transatlantic context, which has, of course, a NATO angle, and Mira already alluded to that, but also a much broader EU-US angle. On strategic autonomy, and I think Charles is right in terms of pointing to some of these challenges. Let me try and connect with what he said with the broader discussion on how the debates on strategic autonomy, security and defense tie with debates on strategic autonomy in other areas such as tech or industrial policy, right? Because we know that the EU has been talking about strategic autonomy for quite some time. Certainly since the 2016 global strategy, but even before, in the context of the common security and defense policy. In fact, the notion of strategic autonomy was initially almost exclusively associated with security and defense. It was about having the ability to conduct certain military operations without resorting to NATO and the United States specifically. So the referent was the United States. But over the last year or so, and Charles touched on this, and so did you, the referent of strategic autonomy has broadened considerably, right? These days, supply chains, data and tech, trade are at the center of the European strategic autonomy debate here in Brussels. And of course, the pandemic has a lot to do with that, right? And perhaps I would add that the fact that the interface between technology, industrial policy, and trade and investment seems to be so critical when it comes to Sino-American competition also underscores the EU's potential as a relatively autonomous international actor, right? Given the fact that it has a lot of economic might, as you alluded to, and both Borrell and Commissioner Breton have alluded to that, right? But my question here is, if autonomy is about being independent and behaving more like a great power, I wonder whether having influence only in certain policy areas gives you autonomy, right? And here we go back to the fact that, for instance, Trump tried to leverage America's security and intelligence links to get Europeans to give in on questions related to trade and or technology, right? The fact that there is linkage, that you cannot isolate one policy area from the rest. We see Russia and China do that all the time as well. I mean, Russia is systematically leveraging energy as a tool for diplomatic influence. So I guess the question there is whether the EU can exercise autonomy only in some policy areas or be a part-time great power, so to speak. That's what I have to say on that. Perhaps one question to go back to the first point. I was wondering whether you have any thoughts on the relationship between China and Russia and how you see that going forward. And then finally, just very quickly on the compass that Charles was asking about. Yes, we know that the strategic compass, which is a document that is going to be negotiated during the course of 2021 and is meant to be delivered by March 2022, while France and Germany head for national elections and the EU undertakes the Conference on the Future of Europe. We know the compass is a document that starts from a threat assessment and then is meant to outline priorities for the European Union in security and defense in relation to four main baskets: crisis management, resilience, capabilities, and partnerships. So it's about setting priorities. But I guess if we zoom out, the broader question is to what extent security and defense will remain a priority for many member states, right? Particularly in light of the pandemic and competing public policy demands. So I would love to hear your views from a country that is surely being affected by the pandemic and in multiple areas, but is very much aware of the importance of continuing to take defense seriously. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Well, many of the issues mentioned are simple global trends which are ongoing anyway. I mean, be Biden, be Trump, I mean, be pandemics or not be pandemics. I mean, for example, let's take this strategic autonomy in production of the goods, which is obviously very valuable because we have seen that the long distance supply chains can be broken in case of pandemics. But the regionalization of production had all been ongoing already for more than a decade. And the reason is that, I mean, production is more separated into the physical production and services surrounding it. And the actual production is getting cheaper and cheaper. And I predict that, I mean, similarly as we only had 3% of our workforce in agriculture, feeding us all in Europe, quite soon we'll be able to have the industrial production we need with the similar amount of population working on it. And which means it's perfectly feasible to regionalize it because, I mean, the cost of labor related to actual production, I mean, can be high if we are very productive at the same time. So this trend is working together with our ambitions, not against our ambitions. So fine, let's just use this trend and make it work for us. I agree that the concepts of strategic autonomy has therefore broadened, but it is also because our risk perception has broadened from military, narrowly conventional military sphere also to the civil sphere. Hence, automatic broadening of the concept. I totally agree that it has broadened and it has to broaden. How I see this discussion on strategic autonomy, I mean, you mentioned something actually which made me think I haven't thought about it before, but I don't predict, for example, that President Biden will be less demanding on Europeans on get our own house in order. Where the difference comes in is precisely in this. In our value-based world, you do not use somebody's weakness in one area to get what you want in the other area. For example, all through the Brexit process, we were told by journalists, I have to say, not politicians, never, see, this Brexit process will end with Brits forcing you to vote with them in the debate about how we arrange our cooperation in the future, because they are your EFP framework country. I said I don't believe it, because I mean, in our value-based world, we apply the principle, we do not mix one stream of cooperation with the other. And I have to say, this has never been the case. Indeed, I mean, these streams have been kept separate. So here, Biden policy will differ. But I think this is the only one. In the rest, indeed, we need to acquire the capability to handle our regional risks so that our partners and allies can have hands free together with us to take care of the rest of the world as well. And we should be able to have our hand in helping even to contain these global risks. This should be our ambition. And I'm not only thinking Russia, I'm thinking North Africa, similarly. We have to be able to intervene, you said, without asking permission. But actually, I don't think we've always asked permission, but we've had to ask for added capabilities wherever we have intervened. So this has been the sequence of events rather. So indeed, we need it. And now here comes European Union. The concept of strategic autonomy, of course, stems also from the previous Commission's document on European foreign policy strategy. And it should actually be, I mean, adding to what we are doing and making us all collectively better, not competing or, I mean, taking something away from transatlantic cooperation. Yet I am really worried because what has become of, let's take the flagship project, military mobility. Original proposal, 6 billion. We ended up somewhere about 1 billion. Because when you go to the council, each and everybody has the national envelope, nobody stands for common projects like military mobility, European research, and innovative development. These are always orphans in the council, but these are the sources of strategic autonomy, whichever way you look, military or civil society. Nobody stands for them in the council. We should collectively stand for them in the council to make sure that we are not only talking about achieving, I mean, a stronger posture, but also, I mean, doing something. This is my worry. Talk doesn't really, I mean, show me where your budget is, not where your, not what you are saying. This is something which Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas has always been also adamant to stress in the European Parliament when she was member there. And it does matter where your budget is.
Absolutely. One of the concerns in Spain, as you may know, is that the Spanish defense industry, for example, is quite vulnerable in the sense that obviously Spain would like to spend more. It only spends about 1.9% of GDP on defense. Spain has suffered this double whammy, first the financial crisis 2008 and now the pandemic crisis, which has knocked just back about 12% in GDP terms. And Spain is probably one of the most pro-EU integration countries anywhere in the EU, but there is of course this fear, as you were saying, that when it comes to developing European defence capabilities, everyone is equal, but some people are more equal than others, to use the old Orwellian phrase. We're running out of time. All the good things must come to an end. So I'd just like to ask you a question about the bilateral relationship. You are here today to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Spain and Estonia. On the face of it, one might think that Spain and Estonia don't have all that much in common. We in this institute, however, have always argued that, particularly in a post-Brexit Europe, Spain should take other countries with which perhaps it hasn't had a very strong, historically speaking, strong relationship, that it should take them more seriously, that it should really make much more of an effort to understand countries such as yours and work much more closely with them. The Baltic police mission that you mentioned, I think is a very good example of that. And I don't think I've ever read an article in the Spanish press even questioning why Spanish jets, the Spanish Air Force, should be deployed in Estonia. I really don't think anyone has ever questioned that, which is excellent news. But my question to you would be, what do you expect from your visit? How can we help us help you, so to speak?
Yes, I think actually The last element which you mentioned, you all worry about that if Europe does more together in defense, then some monopolies will win out. We have the same worry, by the way. Our national defense industry has worry. Therefore, what we need is not monopolies, but common standards on European defense, because common standards will give us interoperability. So our really tiny companies and your middle-sized companies can all provide for the common European markets. And in addition, next time European countries decide to raise defense spending, these relatively monopolistic markets will not raise the prices. One shot of Javelin, which used to cost 100,000 euros, is now 300,000, with pretty little added functionality. It's because we do not have interoperable, real open markets in defense. And this European defense policy hopefully helps us to achieve this. So you see, we do not differ. We have common interests in where you normally even wouldn't think. And there are many other areas, similarly the digital development. I mean, we have many companies who are ready to work globally to develop e-governance services, but we have pretty little workforce. I mean, all other countries may have more workforce, but less clear idea on how to develop e-governance services. And since our companies are like Microsoft, which says you, this is Windows, adapt your needs to my functionality. Our companies always do tailor-made in cooperation with local partners, because you need also to understand local legal culture. Every state will remain a state culture in digital sphere. Similarly, you need language skills and you need maintenance. So we see that we can work all together in many areas, never mind our size, and look for the opportunities where you initially don't see them so easy. I hope a few examples I gave you demonstrate that in places where your mainstream thinking will not throw up a cooperation point, if you look in a more detail and zoom in, you see they are common.
Excellent. Well, that's, I think, a very good note on which to bring this conversation to an end. My thanks to Luis and Mira and José Ignacio, and above all, of course, to you, Madam President. I hope this conversation has contributed to bring both our countries closer together and to raise awareness and interest in Estonia, not only, of course, among our Spanish audience, but our audience worldwide. So on that note, I will bring this session to conclusion. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, and indeed, it was very interesting, and I also learned that we should call the Magallanes Strait the Elcano Strait, actually.
Excellent.
So I learned also something from our visit here today.
We made enormous progress this morning. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for following us.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you so much. A pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye now.
Thank you. Bye.